My sister pointed a gun at me and said, "Sign the papers or else." I just smiled and said, "Do you really think I'm that stupid, Emily?" Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That was the moment I knew things had gone too far. The moment I realized my own blood could look me in the eyes and choose greed over family. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 28, and I've always been the one who kept our family's life together after our dad died young and our mom fell sick. I worked double shifts at the diner we owned, cleaned up the bills, and made sure there was always food on the table. I didn't complain. I thought that's what family was for. My sister Emily didn't see it that way. She's 32, sharp as a blade, and she's always wanted more than what we had. While I was cooking eggs and scrubbing floors, Emily was off chasing degrees and fancy internships. I admired her once, even bragged about her, but she always looked down on me. "You're wasting your life in that diner," she told me more than once. I let it slide because she was my sister. When our mom passed, everything changed. She left behind the diner, the house, and a bit of land. To me, that diner wasn't just a business. It was home. It was the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of regulars laughing at the counter, the place where Mom used to hum while wiping tables. To Emily, it was just property, something she could flip for cash. She came back into town dressed like she owned the world and slid a stack of papers across the table. "Just sign it, Rachel," she said. "Let me handle things. You'll get your share." I didn't sign. Something about the way her eyes glimmered told me she wasn't planning to share anything. I pretended to consider it, but deep down, I knew my sister wasn't here to help me. She was here to take everything. At first, she tried to sweet-talk me, playing the big sister card. Then she turned cruel, saying I was too small-minded, too uneducated to handle property. Her words stung, but I held my ground. That's when the mask slipped. I caught her late one night going through my things, and I discovered she'd already started forging my name on documents. I should have been shocked, but with Emily, I'd learned to expect betrayal. Still, I didn't think she would go as far as she did. That night in the diner office, she slammed the papers in front of me and pulled a pistol from her coat. Her hands weren't shaking. She had thought this through. Her eyes burned with the kind of desperation only greed can bring. "Sign them now," she demanded. I looked at her, the sister I once shared a room with, the one I stayed up with when storms scared us as kids. She wasn't that girl anymore. She was a stranger holding a gun to my chest. And instead of panicking, I felt strangely calm. I leaned back in the chair, folded my arms, and let a smile spread across my face. "Do you really think I'm that stupid, Emily?" Her lips tightened. She didn't understand why I wasn't afraid. She didn't know I had already started preparing for this moment, that I wasn't as helpless as she thought. That was the moment everything between us broke for good, the point where sisterhood ended and something darker took its place. And that's where my story really begins. Our dad's death came out of nowhere. One moment he was heading home from a late shift, the next, a car accident changed everything. I was just a kid, but I can still hear my mom's cry when she got the phone call. After that, the house never felt the same. Mom, Linda, tried to keep us steady, but raising two daughters alone while running a small diner was more than anyone could handle. She grew tired, older than her years, but she refused to give up on that place. The diner wasn't just a business. It was the heartbeat of our small town. Locals came for coffee, pie, and conversation, and they stayed because Mom treated everyone like family. I grew up wiping tables, refilling cups, and listening to the regulars' stories. For me, the diner was where life happened. For Emily, though, it was a burden she wanted nothing to do with. Emily was always different. Even when we were little, she had this way of walking into a room like she was above it. Teachers adored her. She spoke with confidence, made friends easily, and carried herself like she was meant for bigger things. I was the quiet one, the one who blended into the background. After Dad died, I stepped in to help Mom, while Emily buried herself in books, waiting for her escape. When Emily got a scholarship and packed for college, the pride in Mom's eyes was mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I watched Emily leave with suitcases and big dreams, and I stayed behind with aprons and dishwater. She promised she'd come back and help someday, but I knew she meant something different. Helping for Emily never meant standing behind a counter or scrubbing grease off pans. Mom held the diner together with my help, but it was never easy. Bills piled up, repairs were constant, and every day felt like a race against exhaustion. Some nights Mom would collapse into a booth after closing, eyes heavy, whispering, "At least we're keeping it going." I'd nod, even if my feet ached and my hands smelled like bleach. Meanwhile, Emily sent postcards. Photos of dorms, campuses, and later, internships in cities I'd never visit. Each message had the same undertone. "Look how far I've gone." She rarely asked how the diner was doing or how Mom's health was holding up. It was like she wanted to forget where she came from while I was tied to it more tightly every day. When she did return for visits, the difference between us grew sharper. She'd come in wearing polished shoes, while I stood there in a flour-stained apron. She'd wrinkle her nose at the smell of fried food, then talk about professors and opportunities one couldn't even imagine. The regulars noticed too. "Your sister's fancy now," they'd say with a chuckle, but it wasn't a joke to me. It was a wall. Jealousy simmered quietly. She looked at me like I'd wasted myself by staying. I looked at her like she'd abandoned us. Neither of us said it out loud, but it sat heavy in every glance we shared. For Emily, leaving meant freedom. For me, staying meant sacrifice. Those choices carved us into two different people. And though I didn't realize it then, the resentment building between us was like a crack in the foundation. Small at first, almost invisible, but in time it would split wide open. When Mom passed, it was without warning. One day she was fussing in the kitchen, scolding me for working too hard, and the next she was gone. A quiet evening ended with an ambulance's flashing lights, painting the front of the diner. The silence she left behind was unbearable. Losing Dad had fractured us, but losing Mom left me holding pieces of a life I wasn't sure how to keep together. Emily came back for the funeral. I hadn't seen her in years, and when she walked through the church doors, it was like the air shifted. She looked polished, older, like someone who belonged in a high-rise boardroom, not the pews of a small-town chapel. Her embrace was brief, stiff, as though grief was something she couldn't wear in public. She cried a little, but it felt practiced, like she was performing for the crowd. In the days that followed, people brought casseroles, sent flowers, and offered kind words. I stayed busy at the diner, trying to keep myself moving so the emptiness wouldn't swallow me. Emily, on the other hand, seemed more interested in pulling me aside for hushed conversations. The third day after the funeral, she finally showed me why she'd been hanging around. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the counter where Mom used to roll pie dough. "Rachel, this is for the best," she said smoothly. Inside were power of attorney papers, full of legal language I didn't fully understand. She tapped a signature line with a perfectly manicured nail. "All you need to do is sign. I'll take care of everything." Her words were quick, rehearsed. She didn't even pause to let me grieve. I hadn't even caught my breath from burying Mom, and here she was, talking about handling estates and property like it was business as usual. Something about her tone made my stomach twist. I asked her why she was in such a rush. She smiled, that kind of smile she always used when she thought she was the smartest person in the room. "Because these things get messy if you don't act fast. Trust me, Rachel, I know how to manage it. You don't want to be stuck with all the responsibilities." I stared at the pages. My name, my mother's name, legal stamps. Every part of me wanted to believe she was trying to help, that she really did know better than me. But the speed, the insistence, the way her eyes never left the pen on the table, it didn't feel right. I told her I needed time. Her jaw tightened, just barely, but enough for me to see the crack in her calm. "Don't drag this out," she warned. Mom would have wanted it done quickly. That sentence hit me like a slap. Using Mom's memory as leverage? That wasn't love. That was pressure. For the first time, I looked at my sister and saw not just distance, but something harder. I didn't sign that day. I slid the folder back and told her I needed to think. She didn't argue out loud, but I caught the flash in her eye. It wasn't disappointment. It was frustration, maybe even anger. That was the moment I realized our relationship was shifting. Until then, the tension had always been unspoken, hidden under small talk and polite smile. But now it surfaced, sharp and undeniable. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here for control. And though I didn't know the full extent yet, I understood something important that day. If I signed those papers, I would lose more than the diner. I would lose everything Mom had tried to protect. I couldn't stop thinking about those papers. They stayed on my kitchen table for days, the signature line practically glowing at me every time I passed by. Emily kept circling back, always asking if I'd come to my senses. She tried to make it sound casual, but her eyes gave her away. That restless energy of hers wasn't grief, it was hunger. One night, when I was alone at the diner, I started going through the office drawer. Mom had kept everything, receipts, tax forms, even napkins with notes scribbled on them. Buried under a stack of envelopes, I found a letterhead from a real estate company out of the city. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then I saw Emily's name typed neatly at the bottom of a draft agreement. It spelled out a plan to sell the diner, the house, and the land, all bundled together. The offer was generous, the kind of money that could set someone up for life. But not once did it mention splitting anything. Emily had listed herself as the sole owner. No Rachel Carter. No acknowledgement that I'd spent years keeping the place alive. My chest tightened. She hadn't just been pushing me to sign. She'd already set the wheels in motion behind my back. When she came by the next morning, dressed sharp as always, I confronted her. I held the papers out, my hand shaking more from anger than fear. "You were going to sell it all without telling me." She barely blinked. Of course I was. What did you expect? You can't manage this place, Rachel. You never could. Her tone was flat, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Her words hit harder than I expected. I thought maybe she'd deny it, maybe scramble for an excuse. But she didn't. She looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't capable. Like all the years I scrubbed floors, flipped pancakes, and sat up late balancing bills meant nothing. You think working yourself to the bone makes you some kind of hero, she sneered. You've been standing still your whole life, waiting for the world to pity you. That diner is nothing but grease and wasted years. And you? You're too soft to handle what real responsibility looks like. I felt the sting of every word, because part of me knew she believed them. Maybe she always had. Every sacrifice I'd made, every holiday I'd spent behind that counter while she was off chasing something bigger, she didn't see any of it as love or loyalty. To her, it was weakness. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Instead, something inside me hardened. For the first time, I looked at my sister and didn't just see arrogance. I saw an enemy. She wanted to erase me from everything Mom left behind, as if I'd never existed. I set the papers down on the counter between us, careful and deliberate. I'm not signing, Emily, I said, and I'm not letting you take what doesn't belong to you. She laughed, low and sharp. You really think you can stop me? I didn't answer. I just stared at her until the laughter died in her throat. For years, I'd let her have the last word, but not anymore. Something in me shifted that day. I walked away, my hands still trembling, but my mind clear. Emily wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. But I wasn't going anywhere. For the first time, I decided I was done playing her game. From that moment on, I was going to fight. Mark Davis had been in my life for 3 years by then. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of man who swept into a room demanding attention. He worked long hours at a small repair shop on the edge of town, came home smelling of motor oil and soap, and had a way of making me laugh, even on the hardest days. With him, life felt steady. He understood the grind, understood loyalty, and never made me feel small. In the middle of everything with Emily, he was the one thing that kept me grounded. Emily noticed him almost immediately. The first time they crossed paths was outside the diner. He'd come to pick me up after his shift, still in his grease-stained coverall. Emily stepped out of her car and sized him up like he was some sort of curiosity. She smiled that smile she always used when she wanted something. So this is Mark, she said, her tone warm in a way that set off alarms in my head. At first, I brushed it off. My sister had always been charming when she wanted to be. But then little things started to happen. She'd linger in conversations with him longer than necessary, laugh a bit too loudly at his dry jokes, and place her hand on his arm as if it were natural. It wasn't. I knew my sister, and I knew when she was performing. One evening, Mark came over looking unsettled. He sat down at my kitchen table, running a hand through his hair. Your sister stopped by the shop today, he said quietly. My stomach tightened. He told me she hadn't asked about car repairs. Instead, she leaned across the counter, complimented his build, and hinted at how he deserved someone who could give him a better life. He said he cut her off quickly, but the fact she even tried left him shaken. Hearing it out loud was like swallowing glass. It wasn't enough that she was scheming to take the diner, or that she had dismissed every sacrifice I'd made. Now she was targeting the one person I trusted most. It wasn't desire driving her, it was strategy. She wanted to isolate me, leave me with nothing and no one. When I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. I told her I knew what she was doing, that Mark had told me everything. Her response was a smirk and a slow shrug. If he's really yours, why are you so worried? She asked. The cruelty in her voice made my chest burn. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why. Why wasn't it enough to take the money, the property, the legacy? Why did she need to tear apart my relationship too? But the look in her eyes told me the answer. It wasn't just about control or profit. This was personal. She wanted to break me piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Mark reached for my hand that night and said, I'm not going anywhere. His words steadied me, but they didn't erase the ache. Because no matter how firmly he resisted, the damage had already been done. Emily had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That was the moment I understood the depth of her. She wasn't satisfied with winning. She needed me to lose, to suffer, to stand in ruins while she walked away untouched. And if that was her plan, then I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let her succeed. I knew Emily was capable of cruelty, but I still underestimated just how far she would go. The tension between us had become unbearable. Days felt heavy, each interaction like walking through a minefield. She had stopped trying to charm me into signing anything, and instead carried herself with the quiet arrogance of someone convinced she would get her way, no matter what. Late one evening, after closing the diner, I heard movement in the back office. The door was cracked, light spilling out. I stepped closer and froze at the sight of her sitting at Mom's old desk, pen in hand. Spread before her were documents I recognized, the same kind she'd once shoved under my nose. But this time, the name scrawled on the signature line wasn't her. It was mine. The sight knocked the air out of me. My handwriting, copied so carefully it looked real at first glance. My pulse roared in my ears as I stepped inside. "What the hell are you doing?" Emily jerked, then narrowed her eyes. For a brief second, guilt flickered across her face, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by cold defiance. "You were never going to cooperate. I'm just moving things along." I slammed my hand on the desk, pointing at the papers. "That's forgery, Emily. Do you understand what that means? You could go to jail for this." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You're the one drowning in this place. You're desperate, exhausted. People will assume you gave in. I'm the one with credibility, Rachel. Not you." Her voice was rising, edged with something wild. The polished calm she always hid behind was cracking. She shoved the papers into a folder, her movements frantic. "I'm done wasting time waiting for you to wake up. You've clung to this greasy little shack like it's sacred, but it's nothing. And if I have to burn every bridge to get out, I will." My throat tightened. "You're talking about our home, about Mom's life's work, and you're willing to trash it all for a paycheck." She leaned forward, eyes flashing with a kind of desperation I hadn't seen before. "Don't you get it? This isn't about Mom anymore. It's about me. I refuse to rot in this backwater town like you. I refuse to be chained to memories that mean nothing." Her words struck deep, but the fury building in me was stronger. I grabbed the folder before she could stuff it into her bag and held it up. "You're finished. I'll take this to a lawyer, to the police. Do you really want your perfect reputation shredded over this?" Her face twisted. For the first time, she didn't look untouchable. She looked cornered. "You wouldn't dare," she spat. I stared at her steadily. "Try me." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by her sharp breaths. I could see her struggling, the mask slipping further with each second. There was no sisterly charm left in, only venom. That night drew a line we could never step back from. She knew I was willing to fight, and I knew she was willing to destroy everything in her path. Whatever thin thread had once held us together as family had finally snapped. From then on, it wasn't just about an inheritance or a business. It was war, and there wasn't room for both of us under the same roof. The storm had been building for weeks, but that night it finally broke. The diner was dark, the last of the chairs stacked on tables, the scent of coffee lingering faintly in the air. I was finishing the books in the back office when the door creaked open. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The weight of her presence filled the room before she spoke. Emily stepped inside and shut the door behind her. Her heels clicked against the floor, deliberate, like each step was meant to remind me she was in control. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. With one sharp motion, she tossed a thick folder onto the desk. The papers fanned out across the wood, contracts, deeds, signatures waiting in blank spaces. "You're going to sign," she said, her voice rougher than usual. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a black handgun, setting it on the table with a loud final thud. The sound echoed in the small room, louder than it should have been, like punctuation at the end of a threat. My eyes dropped to the weapon, then back to her face. Her expression was taut, jaw clenched, a thin sheen of sweat across her forehead. She was unraveling, and for the first time, she wasn't pretending otherwise. "Pick up the pen," she barked, slamming her hand down next to the papers. The gun rattled against the desk. "Do it now." I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms slowly, deliberately. My heartbeat was steady, even as she waved that pistol like a guarantee. I'd seen the desperation building in her, layer by layer. Tonight, it had finally consumed her. "You think this scares me?" I asked quietly. Her nostrils flared. "Stop playing games, Rachel. You're nothing without me. Nothing. This is your last chance to get out of the way before I make you regret it." Her voice cracked, just slightly, betraying the fear underneath her fury. Instead of flinching, I let a smile curl at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't forced. It came naturally, born from the realization that she'd revealed just how far gone she was. She needed me to break, to crumble under the pressure. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I tilted my head, studying her as if she were some stranger who had wandered into the wrong place. "Look at you," I murmured, "waving a gun at your own sister. All because you can't win any other way." She slammed her palm against the desk again, this time so hard that the pen rolled onto the floor. Her eyes were wide now, burning, her composure shattered. "Sign it," she screamed, her voice raw. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The silence between us stretched, heavy with the sound of her ragged breathing. And then I let the words slip out, calm and sharp as glass. "You're not the only one who knows how to play dirty." Her hand trembled over the gun, and for the first time, she looked unsure. The balance between us had shifted. Her knuckles tightened around the pistol, but I didn't flinch. I let the silence drag, the smile on my face unshaken, because I knew something she didn't. Emily thought the gun was her final weapon, the one thing that could force me to bend. But I had already prepared for this long before she ever walked in that door. Weeks earlier, the night I caught her forging documents, I realized I couldn't rely on threats alone. She would never stop pushing, never stop scheming. So I started collecting everything I could. At first, it was small. Photocopies of contracts she'd doctored, receipts she'd hidden, anything that showed her fingerprints where they didn't belong. Then I got bolder. I installed a recorder in the office, one I knew she wouldn't notice. That's how I captured her late-night phone calls with the real estate agent, the ones where she bragged about unloading the property fast before my idiot sister caught on. Each word was saved, her voice clear as day. And then there was the visit she made to Mark. She hadn't known he'd left the counter microphone on when she leaned over and whispered promises she could never keep. That audio was the sharpest blade I carried with me. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Mark, not the lawyer I'd quietly consulted. I wanted to wait until Emily revealed herself in the ugliest way possible. Tonight she had. The gun on the table wasn't my undoing. It was proof of her desperation, the last move of someone who had already lost. She waved the barrel toward the papers again. "Sign it, Rachel, or I swear." I cut her off, voice steady. "Do you really want to threaten me when I've got everything I need to end you?" Her eyes flickered, confusion then doubt. She tried to cover it with a scoff, but I saw the crack in her armor. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, slow, deliberate. "I've got your voice on tape, Emily. Talking about the sale, about forging my name, about going after Mark. Every lie you thought you buried, it's all recorded. And copies? They're not here. They're safe." Her face drained of color. For a moment, the gun seemed to grow heavier in her hands. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally hissed, "You're bluffing. Try me." My words were calm, sharp as steel. "You think I'd sit here smiling if I didn't already win?" Her grip faltered just slightly, the muzzle dipping toward the desk. She searched my face for weakness, for the fear she wanted to see, but there was none. I had already made peace with the danger of this moment, because I knew she couldn't shoot me without sealing her own fate. I could feel the power shift, the air in the room bending in my favor. She wasn't the predator anymore. She was cornered prey, clinging to the last illusion of control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move fast. I simply let the weight of the truth sink into her. "You came here thinking you could bully me into silence, but all you did was hand me the perfect ending. The world is going to know exactly who you are, Emily, and I won't have to lift a finger." Her hand shook over the gun. For the first time, she looked at me not as her weaker sister, but as someone she couldn't outplay. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned for good.
The first time I heard about their troubles, it came from a customer chatting while I repaired a staircase. He mentioned Rick's name in passing, something about bad investments and money gone missing. I brushed it off at first, but the next week someone else brought it up, then another. Piece by piece, I began to understand what was happening. Rick had been throwing money around on half-baked business ventures, chasing quick profits, and leaving behind nothing but debt collectors. The man who once called me useless had managed to bury his own household in disaster. It didn't stop there. Madison, now in college, was still living like she had a blank check. Shopping trips, new gadgets, expensive nights out. But the family account that once seemed endless had run dry. Bills piled up, tuition notices went unpaid, and whispers of repossession started swirling. The same house that had once seemed untouchable was crumbling under the weight of Rick's arrogance and carelessness. Then came the moment I never expected, my mother reaching out. Almost 10 years had passed without so much as a word from her, and suddenly there it was, a message through someone I barely knew, asking me to call her. She wanted to talk, she said. She needed to see me. Part of me laughed when I heard it. The woman who once told me I was her biggest mistake now wanted my time. I ignored her at first. I had no interest in reopening that wound. For days, I let the request sit in the back of my mind, untouched. But the longer I tried to push it away, the more my curiosity grew. What could she possibly want after all this time? Was it really about me, or just the money she knew I had earned on my own? I didn't answer, not yet. Instead, I listened quietly as more news drifted my way. The debts were real. The tension in their home was rising, and Madison, so used to having everything handed to her, was furious at the thought of losing her lifestyle. My mother was caught between a husband sinking the family and a daughter demanding more than she could give. And there I was, standing apart from it all, untouched by the chaos. For the first time in my life, they needed me, and for the first time, I had the power to choose silence. A small part of me wondered what it would feel like to finally face her, to see her without the shield of Rick's lies. But another part savored the distance, the freedom of knowing I didn't know them a thing. I wasn't ready to step back into their world, not yet. For now, I stayed quiet, watching their downfall from afar. When I finally agreed to see her, it wasn't out of kindness. It was curiosity, plain and simple. We met at a small diner off the highway, neutral ground where neither of us held the advantage. I arrived early and sat with my back to the wall, watching the door. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The years had added lines to her face, but more than that, there was a weariness in her eyes I had never seen before. She slid into the booth across from me, tried to smile, then reached for my hand. I pulled back. The silence stretched until she finally spoke. "Ethan, we're still family. Family sticks together when things get hard." The words nearly made me laugh. Instead, I leaned forward and reminded her of the night that had changed everything. "Do you remember your birthday? You told me the best gift I could give you was to leave your life. I gave you that gift. Why are you asking for it back now?" Her face tightened, but she pressed on. She spoke about Madison, about how her tuition was overdue and how she deserved the chance to finish school. Then she mentioned Rick, lowering her voice like she was embarrassed, saying his business was collapsing and the debts were drowning them. She talked about second chances, about forgiveness, about blood ties. It was a performance of desperation, and every word only pushed me further away. I listened, but I felt no sympathy. She wasn't there to see me. She wasn't asking how I had survived or what my life looked like now. All she wanted was money, a rescue she hadn't earned. When she finally stopped, waiting for me to say something, I sat back and let the weight of my answer fall flat.
"No.
I'm not going to fix what you broke. You made your choice a long time ago. You picked them over me, and now you get to live with that." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. Once, that sight would have shattered me. Now it felt hollow. She had begged me once before, but it had been for my absence. I had granted that wish. This time, her begging carried no power. The waitress came by to refill our coffee, breaking the silence, and I used the moment to stand. My mother called my name, voice trembling, but I didn't turn back. I left her sitting there in the booth, clutching at the edge of the table like it might hold her together. Walking out of that diner, I felt no guilt, no hesitation. For the first time in years, I was the one with the choice, and I chose to leave her exactly where she had left me, alone.
Her silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the old office fan. The gun hovered in her hand, no longer steady, her confidence draining like water through a sieve. I leaned forward, my voice calm, deliberate. "Do you really think I'd sit here without a plan? Everything I told you, it isn't just in my head. The evidence is already out. A lawyer has it, and so do the police. You pull that trigger, or you walk away. It doesn't matter. Either way, your lies are finished." Her eyes widened, darting back and forth as if searching for a way out that no longer existed. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. You couldn't. I didn't blink. It's already done." The weight of those words hit her harder than any scream could have. Her hand trembled, the barrel dipping lower until it pointed at the desk. She tried to summon that icy mask she always wore, but it was gone. What remained was raw panic, the face of a woman realizing the walls had closed in. Her breath came fast, ragged. You'd ruin your own sister? Just to win." The anger that had lived inside me for months surged forward, sharper than the fear I should have felt. My voice cracked, but not from weakness. From fury. "Ruin my sister? Emily, you did that all on your own. I gave up years of my life keeping this place alive while you chased your shiny future. And when you came back, did you care about me? About Mom? No. You wanted to erase me. You wanted to take everything I bled for and toss me aside like trash." She flinched at the words, her knuckles white around the pistol she no longer seemed capable of using. I pressed on, the heat in my chest spilling out like fire. "You weren't satisfied stealing money. You tried to steal Mark. You tried to steal my dignity. Do you know how that feels? To watch your own flesh and blood turn every sacrifice into an insult? I gave up my freedom for this family. And you." I jabbed my finger toward her, my voice rising. "You spit on it. You spit on me." Emily staggered back a step, her back hitting the filing cabinet with a dull thud. Her bravado was gone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices. "You thought you could bully me into silence," I said, each word cutting through the thick air. "But here you are, with a gun in your hand and nothing left to stand on. You've destroyed everything, our bond, our trust, the last pieces of family we had. Not because you needed to, because you wanted to, because hurting me mattered more to you than anything else. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Her arms sagged until the gun rested against her thigh, useless now. For the first time, I saw her not as the sister who always towered over me, but as someone beaten, cornered by the very schemes she built. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that comes right before something breaks completely. She tried to speak, lips parting, but no words came. And I knew then, Emily Carter had already fallen. The flashing of red and blue lights cut through the diner windows, washing the office walls in shifting color. Emily froze, her head snapping toward the sound of car doors slamming shut outside. I didn't move. I'd been waiting for this moment. Heavy boots echoed across the tiled floor as officers pushed through the entrance. One called out our names, the authority in his tone slicing through the thick silence. Emily's grip on the pistol slackened. She looked at me with wide eyes, realization dawning. "You called them," she hissed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The door burst open, 2 officers storming in, weapons drawn. They shouted commands, their voices sharp and practiced. Emily's hand shook as she set the gun down on the desk. It clattered loudly, a sound that felt like the end of something terrible. They moved fast, cuffing her wrists, reading out the charges in clipped tones: fraud, attempted coercion, assault with a deadly weapon. She shouted over them, desperate, her words spilling like broken glass. "She's lying. She forged those documents, not me. You don't understand. I was trying to save us." Her voice cracked, thin and frantic, but the officers didn't waver. They had the evidence. They had her cornered, and she knew it. I sat in the chair, watching as they led her out. She fought every step, her eyes darting back to me like she expected me to swoop in and rescue her. But I didn't move. Not this time. When the door finally shut behind them, the diner went still again. The office smelled faintly of ink and old wood polish, but beneath it all was the sharp memory of gunpowder and fear. I leaned back, exhaustion settling into my bones. The lawyer confirmed everything within days. With Emily facing charges, there was no challenge left against me. The diner, the house, the land, it was mine legally. On paper, I had won. But that wasn't the part that mattered. What I reclaimed that night wasn't just property. It was my dignity, the voice she had spent years trying to silence. One evening, after the last customer left and the neon sign flickered in the window, I stood alone in the quiet dining room. The booths were empty, the counter wiped clean. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no manipulation hanging over me like a storm cloud. Just peace. I let my hand rest on the back of a chair and whispered into the stillness. "This was never about the money, Emily. It was about family, and you threw that away." The words lingered in the air, heavy but true. I wish I could tell you that moment felt triumphant, that I celebrated. But the truth is, it felt like grief. Grief for the sister I lost long before the police ever took her away. Grief for a family that could never be whole again. Still, there was a strange kind of relief in knowing I hadn't let her erase me. She tried, God, she tried. But in the end, she only destroyed herself. And so here I am, telling you my story, not because it has a happy ending, but because it's real. Betrayal like that doesn't heal. Revenge doesn't make it easier, but it does give you back a piece of yourself, the part they thought they could steal. That's enough for me. Do you think I made the right choice by standing my ground against Emily, or should I have forgiven her? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.